Today we are going to be talking about structural bypass vault burglaries in Europe, a comparative crime pattern analysis. And I want to thank Sandra for giving me this idea. And Sandra, maybe you could tell us why you had the idea and what your a little bit, a small bit about your background.
Yes, sure. Well, as you know, I'm pretty much interested in behavioral elements of things that lead to threatening behavior or violent behavior or crime in general, and describing things that are observable all around the initiation of crime and actually committing the crime that probably would then lead to preventive measures is what I'm really interested in. So I thought it would be really interesting to look at some of those cases that you now so graciously chose together and kind of take different lenses and look at what we can bring together in order to look at the crime from different perspectives.
Yes, and I am interested in this because my book, Elements of Crime Patterns, will help people identify things like this better and give a common language. And it's foundational, so it won't have, the book doesn't have everything in it like this in it, and it doesn't go into exactly how to use it. And that's why I'm doing videos like this. So
Yeah.
next slide, Sandra.
Yes, here we go.
So there were three cases identified. The first one was brought to my attention by Sandra, and we'll be going through these three cases. So we can go to the next slide and start with the first case. But first, let me say that the similarities in these cases are large-scale safe deposit thefts
Mhm.
with repeatable operational logic, architectural vulnerabilities, and relevant to an analyst and an investigator. So, and also I would say to any kind of facility risk manager, not just not just police. So we'll look at the first crime. After, see, I haven't looked at the presentation today, but the pattern definition itself. Now, this is what I find most interesting because we don't define patterns like this. We let them be in officers' heads. We might write reports, we might do research. The oldest crime, they did a lot of studies, but we don't have names for them. Just like you would have if you were a doctor, you would have a type of syndrome.
Yes.
And so my book is, and I'm not advertising, but I'm explaining so much that first you have to have the foundation before you could build the pattern definitions. And this pattern definition would be, we could call it, in the ideal world of me, where you would diagnose crime problems or crimes to watch out for or crimes to know about, like a dictionary of these pattern definitions. Maybe someday we'll
Mhm.
have, but structural bypass vault burglary. So you'll see by the end of this presentation why that makes sense. These burglars got into the vault without going through the door. And so the building was treated as the target, not the door. And
Mhm.
they used space to bypass security. They took advantage. The opportunity is one element of a crime pattern. And time was exploited as a resource because they chose times that were more spacious and abundant to commit their crimes. The next
Yeah.
slide. Yeah. Okay, what would you want to say?
And I was just wanted to ask, what would you say, what would you consider the advantage of defining this pattern? I mean, we're excited about patterns, you and I, and probably a lot of analysts are, but what would you say makes so much sense in actually defining this pattern for investigators or analysts in general?
Well, first of all, they would recognize the pattern fa sooner, and they could look at the other investigations in a type like this that's rare.
Hmm.
So, but if it's common too, they could look at what works in investigations, what works in prevention. They would have, if everyone was educated in this, they would recognize, they would say, this was what was identified. They would know it more quickly. So it's a heuristic. It's a thinking shortcut. Instead, everybody's got to explain a lot more without something like this.
Yes, of course. Okay, yeah. Yeah, Gelsenkirchen. This is this year. This is the freshest of the crimes that you actually chose. And yeah, so here we go. Let's hear it.
Well, so you actually chose, you said, why don't we do something with this crime?
Yes, because it
And
was really
so
interesting.
there was a massive heist in December
Hmm.
2025, and the attackers accessed the bank's underground wall from an adjacent parking garage. So this is branch. How do you pronounce it again, Sandra? The branch is like a common
Sparkasse.
bank.
Mhm,
Yes.
yes.
So it's a branch of a common bank
Hmm.
in Germany. And
Hmm.
they used a heavy duty drill to bypass the concrete. And because it was a Christmas holiday, they used that time as an advantage. 3,000 safe deposit boxes were compromised, which
Hmm.
was a lot of the vault's inventory. And they only discovered the breach after a fire alarm was triggered on Monday. So the losses were estimated in tens of millions of euros. They don't really have the exact amount. Like I have a slide, they're
Yes.
saying up to 100 million, some say 30 million, but
Yes.
they compared this to another heist where they went through a tunnel, which isn't in this
Hmm.
presentation, but
Hmm.
we'll go on to the next slide and talk a little
Hmm.
bit about this crime.
Yes.
So they targeted the branch and breached
Hmm.
these boxes. Entry through the parking garage, reinforced concrete drill was the method and the losses. So you have where this
Hmm.
branch,
Hmm.
what was breached, so like the modus operandi, the
Hmm.
entry method, the tools and method, and then the property taken.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe you could go through this slide, Sandra.
Yeah, well, Norderstedt 2021 is another case where also the same brand was actually targeted. So the Sparkasse was targeted in August 21. Well, they used the vertical bypass this time, or this team, and they accessed the vault from the street, and actually decided to enter from a rented apartment directly above the band. So they drilled through the concrete floor to lower themselves into the secure area, bypassing the perimeter sensors. And in this case, 600 safe deposit boxes were, targeted and opened and emptied. And it says here, and you said also earlier that it's particularly interesting and significant for the legal aftermath because it triggered a landmark civil litigation wave where a German court ordered the bank to compensate victims due to the actual insufficient vibration sensors, which is actually also likely to happen with a case that we heard of before, and shifting the conversation from criminal liability to corporate security negligence. This is similar to, or we're assuming something similar to happen in the first case.
And the level of planning had to be there for renting an apartment above the bank. You don't usually rent an apartment in one day. So there was planning involved in this. Next slide. So the same bank
Mm-hmm.
type branch, not the
Mm-hmm.
exact location, but the same bank. Rooms
Mm-hmm.
rented above the vault. Vertical drilling access, hundreds of boxes affected. And then the litigation, which you said is likely to this the first newest crime was it just happened
Mm-hmm.
weeks
Yes.
ago. And so next slide. Here's so in this landmark case, they say in research, Hatton
Mm-hmm.
Garden in the UK, London's most infamous modern burglary, they said, over
Mm-hmm.
the Easter bank holiday.
Mm-hmm.
They targeted the safe deposit company of Hatton Garden, and they didn't use the door. They went down a lift shaft, so to access the basement, and used this certain kind of coring drill. Went through the reinforced concrete again over a long holiday weekend, which was Easter bank, and they looted 75 deposit boxes containing gold, jewelry, loose diamonds, and I'm sure quite a bit of other things. But so it was considered analog, like old-fashioned, right? So they're still doing old-fashioned crimes. Yes, there's
Yes.
cyber crime,
Yes.
but there's old-fashioned. And these people were convicted. So in this
Mhm.
presentation, we're not suggesting the same people are doing it. We're
Mhm.
calling it a crime pattern type,
Mhm.
basically.
Mhm.
So you see the parts of this was, and I don't know what happened to the slide after the second one, the second one, but it's
Mhm.
fine. The London Jewelry District, Easter Bank Holiday, lift
Mhm.
shaft, industrial drilling, arrests and convictions.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Mhm.
they ignored the vault door entirely, exploiting
Mhm.
buildings architecture. And you could see
Mhm.
that this could be for other crimes, and I'm sure it
Mhm.
is. And
Mhm.
it's just something to be aware of. So identifying a pattern like this means we could think what seems like thinking out of the box, but the only box is that you didn't open that box, right? It happens through tunnels, through building infrastructure. And that could be in times of worrying about the critical infrastructure of any nation, terrorism, any kind of serious threat, to be thinking of structural vulnerabilities.
Yes.
So this is really about thinking, not so much about the content of these crimes.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you see the methods were comparing comparative. They were different paths, but the same logic. Lateral garage, entry from above, vertical shaft.
Mhm.
So it's they wouldn't be, if you were querying though, all the crimes with the vertical shaft or an elevator or whatever, you wouldn't come up with the other ones. And that's
Mhm.
where thinking also arises. You would say you're thinking in terms of words, and in my book, I use words in different crime pattern examples. I use words you might use to query, but it
Mhm.
isn't just what's in that crime, but what's like it. For example, when I had a case where there was an unknown sex offender targeting women, one crime report was in an elevator, one was in a stairwell, and the sex offense unit could identify that. But I was thinking, how are you going to find these similar crimes in a lot of data unless you're thinking about
Mhm.
similarities,
Yeah.
right? So tools,
Mhm.
well, these somebody's got to know how to use industrial
Yeah.
or core drilling here
Yes.
and know how to penetrate reinforced concrete. I mean, you're not going to just do, maybe you
Yeah.
practice somewhere,
Yeah.
right? Noise, they have to know that the noise will be tolerated if they don't want to get arrested and manage all the debris. And you noticed something about one of the recent case, Sandra, about the debris. It was more cleaned up or organized, I think you said, or maybe it was in the article.
Yeah, well, I mean, we had this discussion last time about actually just mentioning or talking about things that are observable. And one thing that was observable from at least the things that I saw briefly in the news and things like that is that you could almost look for patterns also in the things they left behind and how it was left behind. It, in a way, I had the idea of a fractal where some things seem to be really unorganized, but actually very organized. So the time and the focus and the concentration that they had as they did it, also the time frame in terms of they made time because it was over the weekend, over the holidays, like you described, kind of shows then a certain pattern of how the things are left behind. And I just thought it was striking that in this chaos, there seems to be order. And if you wanted to reconstruct how they got to this mess that they left behind, there must have been structural processes how they got there. And I thought it was just very interesting to see this in those images that were spread all over the news. So complete chaos and unorganization or not being really interested in how they leave the crime scene behind, I would say looks a little different. So they
Yes, and it's like what you said is the reason. I mean, I wrote the book too. It's observable behavior, not just like, I wonder what the psychology of these people are. Who are they?
Yeah.
Investigators are always focused on who,
Hmm.
and when someone's writing a crime report, they're focused on what charges you can place on this
Hmm.
crime. What is this crime? But I'm more interested in how the method of operation and in an objective term, what's really happening that can link crimes. And you are too on the more nuanced
Hmm.
behavioral um, patterns of individuals, where I'm
Hmm.
looking at more like data or
Yeah.
information that we can gather, just like I used information from the internet
Yeah.
prodded by you
Yeah.
to make this pattern up. And then, but for the tools and tradecraft, they have to know locate a power source or have
Mm.
a power source
Mhm.
and how they cool it down, which would be way beyond me. So next slide. I would never be doing this crime. So time was an enabler. So time is an element of crime patterns.
Mhm.
And they knew there wouldn't be a lot of staff on holiday timing and alarm ambiguity. So there might have been some familiarity with how alarm systems would work there. And then, of course, the extended time on target, knowing that there's time to do things.
And exactly. And linking into what we've discussed earlier about this case with the Gelsenkirchen case, it was really remarkable that apparently there were several alarms going off with the fire department and I think also police going there and investigating, not finding anything while the criminals were actually at the spot currently emptying the deposit boxes. Or they probably just stopped the drill for a few moments or 10 minutes that the others were investigating and then continued with their work. So they were actually there and didn't notice that something what was going on. So knowing about the security systems is one thing, but kind of also having the courage to just hold it for 10 minutes and just wait for the police to go or the fire department to go again. That's a different thing.
And the people responding to the alarm will look at the vault door and
Hmm.
not at the perimeter, like other imagined ways of access, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's another learning that can come from a case like that, a study like this, and the extended time on target. But so time is an enabler too. Um, People aren't home during the day when they're maybe more people work at home because of telecommuting, but residential burglars will use time as an enabler,
Mhm.
and robbers will rob fast food restaurants at the end of the day when there's more money. So time
Mhm.
can be an enabler or is definitely an element of crime patterns. Next slide. So they took advantage of surveillance blind spots. There were no
Yeah.
motion detectors in the safe deposit box location. So that's something that if someone wanted to right there
Mhm.
counteract this without spending as much money.
Mhm.
But gaps in the structure where the vulnerabilities, structural
Mhm.
gaps, and then delayed response thinking,
Mhm.
because not only is the staffing of a bank branch lower during holidays, staffing of law enforcement might be lower, right? Everyone's off.
Yes.
Everyone's trying to
Yes.
do their own family things.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you had to know there were
Mhm.
multiple offenders. Well, the newest crime, they don't know who did it, but they can kind of assume by the way, the method of operation, how did it happen, and different roles. So someone's drilling, someone's emptying. It would be very hard for this to be a one-person operation. Have to have some technical competence, although we discuss this in our practice run through that maybe it wasn't that sophisticated, but they still had to know how to use these tools and locate them. And I wonder, that would be another investigative strategy. Where do you get this drill from? If it's like who has it? Like, and if there's any kind of forensic information about the drill, you never know. I
Mhm.
don't know, but I'm sure
Mhm.
watched enough crime shows, you could maybe be able to tell what tool was used. And then they had to be really, really willing to take the risk, be
Mhm.
patient, and be disciplined to get through there.
Mhm.
They couldn't open it up, just run in and grab
Yeah.
things and run away.
Yeah. Yeah, that's yeah, this endurance is really something.
And the
Hmm.
issue with this, and too, why it's going to be hard, and you were mentioning, Sandra, how people might exaggerate what was in their safe deposit box,
Hmm.
but you might not, where is this? If you were going to look at, okay, could we find the thieves by looking at where the stolen goods are showing up, but it's not very traceable.
Hmm.
Um, we don't know for sure, but you would assume a lot of it's not very traceable, and that you don't have to sell like jewelry right away. And if they go out of the jurisdiction, it might be really hard to track. So that's one element of a crime pattern. Well, two, property itself and how it flows and where the markets are.
And I also thought it was striking. I don't know what you thought about this, but just a simple fact that after this kind of news spread that there was a breach of this bank, you had a crowd of people that owned deposit boxes in this bank, kind of like a demonstration almost, like waiting in front of the bank, waiting for answers. And also, this action kind of, in a way, clouded or inhibited a little bit the focused investigation, because first they had to take care of the crowds and kind of move everybody out of the way and all that, and kind of also say, okay, we don't have answers yet, but you're still looking at 50 people, 100 people, thousands of people, if we take the numbers correctly. And this was also striking that, they were busy with other stuff in a way, and kind of derailed a little bit from focusing on investigating.
Right. And then, so there would have to be a means also to interview these people to say, what did you have in your safe deposit box? Right.
Yeah.
And like you said, they might not be 100% honest, but many people
Mm.
aren't criminals.
Mm.
So, you just don't know. It
Yes.
is very interesting. But so right then, it's like follow up an emergency like this would be a means for the people to report
Yeah.
what was stolen. It was like it sounds like the 1929 the fail, when it crashed and everybody was running in on the banks.
Yes, it's interesting. And just like you said it, or you commented on it earlier, that in the other case that then, there was a court decision on, what there was a negligence in relation to the safety security measures of the bank. I mean, here it could be probably the same thing. And also this can take, if you think about preventive measures, it would then mean also, does a bank even know how to deal with these kind of crises, right? Do they even have protocols of how to work with something like this? Is this now a new thing? Um, or, would they need to adjust their proceedings?
And as far as we know, there could be something like this in the banking. There could
Mhm.
be some
Mhm.
kind of template somewhere in the
Mhm.
world, but the problem is if you don't share it with all the people who work in policing, law enforcement, there's information that will fall through the cracks that could be important
Yeah.
to this. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So these are, as I said before, these cases aren't linked as far as anyone knows.
Mhm.
And there is a big gap between crimes, but just like a serial killer, right? Like, so there could be somebody doing, as you
Mhm.
might see in some great, I mean, not great, but um, serious art, the cultural items thefts, they might space it out over time. So we like to think that crimes are always linked because somebody's very visible in the media over a short period of time, but some criminals do space their times. And they adapted to their local situation of how they entered, right? Above, which is like it's like movies, right? But these are real crimes and it's not
Yes.
funny, but I mean,
Yeah.
I'm saying it's a movie, but it's like
Mhm.
some people are being victimized. So how did they get in? We're different. And no indications that they're related.
Mhm. Yeah.
But
Mhm.
like I said before, and you asked me, why would you care about this? And
Mhm.
maybe nobody will, but I don't think it's true. I think
Mhm.
that if we wanted to make this a real profession of being an analyst and doing this kind of work of saying of pattern identification, which I, as a citizen, would hope law enforcement is doing. I want to not only to get these criminals who might risk my money and valuables, but I also want you to get the criminals who might break in my car. I want every level or who, to
Yes.
prevent any kind of crime for anyone by using information we have at our fingertips, really, because I'm not an expert in this crime. You're not, and this is
Mhm.
what we could produce. Here's the crime pattern. Same operational logic, structural exploitation. They calculated the risk. Okay, Christmas, Easter, whatever length of
Mhm.
time, and same challenges. Okay, we can't identify what's even in these safe deposit boxes, and so the criminals, we can't follow up by looking at what they took. Probably not, but it might not be true. There might be somebody who has something that's traceable. So you could classify it. So this is all in my mind about some kind of classification. And what do you think? I mean, what's the value you might see, Sandra?
Yeah, well, first of all, it is really about looking at the core elements of crime that are very easy to understand and that also make crime comparable on a different level and kind of, which I must say I would always be a fan of, then go into the mode of detecting a pattern. So this is probably a personal preference, but I would prefer to know what I'm looking for rather than trying to make sense of something I cannot even grasp, right? So with an investigative mind, I do, or a criminological kind of approach. I think this approach is valid for structuring thoughts, communicating thoughts, comparing crime, and bringing it to a general understanding of the components that are relevant.
Yeah, and so for me, as someone who looked for patterns, I wouldn't have to spend so much time explaining patterns, and I also would actually know I saw them more quickly. And I might not come just look at it and see this, but I'd look at each, I would have a way to analyze, okay, why do I think this is, what's going
Mhm.
on here? And then maybe I'm the one who only sees this one crime. And then when the next one comes, I recognize it right away because I've analyzed it. I've broken it down into its structure. It's more systematic. There's less guessing involved, and there's more
Mhm.
ability to, let's say, if you were an investigator in law enforcement, look for people who you might know that were committed similar crimes or have these skills, knowledge and skills to do this crime, just to rule them out, to narrow your investigative strategies. And it's just like you said, a way to communicate much more clearly. And if you were, and because you're looking at nuances of behavior, you might be able to look at similar types of situation. What do people do? It just allows it to be studied more robustly, like with a framework instead of in our heads. And
Mhm.
it's can be more collective. And I mean, I don't know if that will ever happen, but I think it will have to. And I think even with AI helping people think more logically and helping them process more information, it would be possible to do that. You could take through open source media, which I did, use AI to analyze this and then verify it.
Mhm.
Is that okay? This this can break it down into its parts, and then you could make it into a new whole, and then you have a type of pattern. So I think we're in a new age of thinking, and
Mhm.
AI can be a great thinking tool. So anything, I guess we could go to the next slide, and then we'll
Mhm.
talk about what might be. We're almost ending there, but
Mhm.
this would be the reason it would be valuable. You could say. Um, what's going on here in this investigation? Oh, this falls into this pattern classification. Holidays with limited response protocols, vaults accessible structurally, absence of motion detectors inside a vault envelope, and people going to answer alarms without visually confirming that nothing was taken. But that takes resources, right? Because most of the responders can't go in the vault. They
Exactly.
they might not have been able to access the elevator shaft easily, whatever, so who knows, but they could say, "Oh, I've heard of this," right? It could be a teaching tool.
Yeah. Hmm. Now moving us around right and left, so that we can see.
Well, I think though, obviously,
Hmm.
this is for the people who own the banks or the
Yes.
safe deposit box companies, and that's one of the issues too, because um, the private sector doesn't always report crimes. Obviously, you can't hide this crime, but they're responsible for their security, not the police. And ultimately, the police will come. But
Yes.
it's if you have a business, you want to protect the people who are your clients. So you expand security perimeter beyond the vault door. So you actually know what the perimeter is. You monitor adjacent structures so you're aware of it. So maybe you basically, it sounds like you have to put a motion detector inside the vault. Um, and if alarm ambiguity is a risk factor, so when it doesn't seem like anything happened, like it's ambiguous, it doesn't look like anything, I don't know.
Hmm.
It's a risk, and reassess assumptions about secure areas. How secure are you? Doesn't mean
Hmm.
you never locate your bank branch in a certain area, but you understand the risk. So this is a risk assessment tool too.
Yeah. I mean, it is so useful and so clear that it would naturally translate into either assessment steps or preventive steps, right? So this is the magic that comes with it, actually. Hmm.
All right. So the key takeaway, and I haven't put that's sort of the next book, right? First, you have the elements of crime patterns, which is 24 basic elements. There might be more, but the ones I came up with, I'm not the be all end all in defining this, but no one's done it this way. And then crime types, 27 different crime types. There's more, but most fall into the categories.
Mhm.
And and so these patterns could be recognized more quickly, and because they travel through time, through the different regions, right? So a lot of crime looks the same. There's probably similar crimes in other continents, right? Or they're adapted to the situation in their country. Even if it's not the same offender, understanding pattern thinking is
Mhm.
important. It's not just like I was told, okay, you're going to look for crime patterns. You'll know them when you see them, right? No, what if you could see them because you know them?
Mhm.
That's a good quote I'll have to use
Yeah.
somewhere. And if you understand the systems, what's all involved, so you don't have just the elements. And in the crimes, you have the systems. What happens before? What happens during? What happens after? And I give some guidelines about that, not the be all end all. Or I'd have to write a book for each one, but more like what's going on in the system of crime? How does it happen?
Mhm.
What might you look for? And then you could prevent crimes. The failure would be the crime happened. So you prevent repeated failures. So what would you want to say in closing, Sandra? And I might follow up with a line or two.
Sure. Well, what gets me most excited about this thing is, like I said before, is that those elements that you describe make understanding the crime in its totality so much easier as you go about looking at it, investigating it, kind of preparing it for a court hearing and things like that. If I imagine that somebody would use it extensively, it just gives you so much terminology that you can lean onto that just makes it structural, it gives it weight, and it's comparable and anybody can access it and also understand it, right? It's not like somebody made a word up. No, it's like look at the details, follow it up, and you'll probably come to the same wording. That's one thing. And the other thing is that the harshest critique against it would probably be from an investigator saying, okay, not only I should solve this crime, but now I also need to look for patterns, right? Somebody could say, oh my God, it's not like I've got enough work now, also that, right? On top of everything else. And just like you said before, it's not additional. It is actually funneling towards simplifying solving a crime by understanding the elements of it and investigating the exact target areas around it. So, with the elements that you were describing, it just gives you a bubble of investigative focus that you can then work with. And I think this is just super exciting. Like if I would be an investigator, I would be very excited about this.
Right, and that's the thing. The elements are the 24 elements have many variables. And of course, there's no way to put every variable, but because of AI, I could put many, many variables that I would not be able to do with AI because I knew that's what I wanted in this particular text. And so investigators would would be wanting to know patterns in the sense that if it was their criminal committing other crimes that they could
Mhm.
prosecute them for, right? But also if there were pattern templates, they could see the part they forgot, they didn't look for if somebody was designing
Mhm.
them. Okay, so let's say I'm thinking of a pattern of this gang, the Felony Lane gang that used to come up and go to bank. They probably still are, but not as much. ATMs
Mhm.
that were in the farther lane, and
Mhm.
they would put credit card skimmers there. So maybe if there was a template of this gang's activity, each investigator wouldn't have to think on their own. I wonder what else there could be to help.
Mhm.
Else should I be looking for here? Right. So it's not really, it's about, as my father used to say when I talked about this job, he would say it's not rocket science, but it's not really scientific right now. It's like tacit knowledge, what's in your head, what you've read. I mean, there's definitely training like this for investigators, but there's really little training for officers. So the officer or the first responder comes to the alarm,
Mhm.
doesn't
Mhm.
know about these because they're not trained in patterns.
Mhm.
They could be the one who prevents the actual carrying out of the crime, make arrest, right? So there's
Mhm.
so many reasons, endless reasons to be doing this. So I'm glad that you read my first version of the book, and the second one is more extensive and I think more useful because I realize that I'm going to have to explain how to use it because it
Mhm.
didn't really exist, right? It's like we can function without it, but it would really
Mhm.
make it more professional if we use this way of thinking. It's really a
Mhm.
way of thinking.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.